freedom has a taste, and it really does. When you lose 100% of it, I mean, literally everything you've ever known is taken from you, and you're begging for everything. To get that freedom back again is really remarkable.
Someone cares about you.
There's a reason why your heart is beating.
You still have a purpose.
Don't give up.
It's important to know that you're not alone.
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
You are not alone.
Today we have a very special guest joining us, Air Force veteran Ralph Galati. If his name sounds familiar, it may be because Ralph is the second youngest prisoner of war on record during the Vietnam War, or because of his amazing contribution that he makes to his community. Some of which include founding veteran services at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia and inspiring people across the country sharing stories of resilience, personal growth, and leadership. In today's conversation, we'll dive into Ralph's journey, his insights as a veteran and POW, and discover the lessons he's learned along the way. So without further ado, Ralph, welcome to the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to really dive into your story and get a full understanding of what life was like for you coming up through the years and into your time joining the Air Force. So what was life like growing up during the Vietnam era? I
spent 8 years in school in the 60s. So high school and college was the 60s. And you're too young to appreciate it. But it was a really dramatic and crazy era to be in. There was good stuff like the British invasion of music and the space race and landing on the moon. And then there was the bad stuff, like all the anti-war fervor and the assassinations. I mean, it was disruptive. And I think it was formative for people that grew up in that era. You know, you either adapted or you died. I mean, you either figured out a way to settle into some niche for yourself. And, you know, with the war being the way it was, and I am the family of immigrants. I mean, I'm basically first generation American. And so to have all that and then have the opportunity to be the first one in my family to go to college, first one to be an officer in the military, first one to fly. I mean, you know, a lot of firsts, but it was also a lot of risks. I didn't appreciate it at the time because I was too young and stupid to know what I was doing. But as I look back, you know, everything I did was risky. And I think it kind of helped me along the way later on that I was willing to push the limits a little bit, in a sense, to find out what I was made of and, you know, learn a lot about yourself. So the 60s were a very formative time.
Now, you mentioned you were willing to take some risks, and I know that probably resonates with a lot of veterans even to this day, myself included. I know that when I was deciding to become a corpsman, I wasn't necessarily thinking about the consequences of going to war. I just knew that I wanted to serve and thought that I would stand a chance. So what made you to decide to join the Air Force?
You know, I had this thing about flying, although I'd never been in an airplane. And it was just, you know, I never was on an airplane until I flew in flight school. So I think it was just a fascination. It was knowing all my relatives had a chance to serve in World War II or Korea. My father did not have the opportunity. So I think some of it was fulfilling a mission that he wasn't able to fulfill. And the Air Force seemed like it would be exciting. Once again, take a risk. I was an English major in college. I had no technical background at all. So, and then you shock yourself because you find out that in many cases you're better than you think you are. And I figured if I was going to go into the military at that time, I may as well have some fun. And if I was going to the Air Force, I figured, you know, inevitably I was going to go to Vietnam. So, I mean, all those things were conscious or subconscious. But I wasn't naive about it. I knew that if, depending on what I did, I was probably going to end up in combat. And I was okay with that. And as it turned out, I got my wish. I didn't get everything I hoped for, but I ended up in a combat situation flying in F-4s, and it was awesome.
So you never flew in an airplane before. What was it like when you stepped into the cockpit for the first time with I'm assuming you had a training instructor in the plane with you.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was traumatic. I mean, it was, well, at first I did flight school first, and then I got upgraded to the F-4, and, you know, it was claustrophobic. It was tight. You know, you're wearing masks and you're strapped in. You know, it's a very surreal situation. And you're flying 400 miles an hour and you're gyrating and you're pulling G's. You're doing 100% of the things you had never been expected to do. But it was an incredible buzz. And my point was, if you're going to fly, you may as well fly at 500 miles an hour and be in a Maserati than fly at 180 knots and be in a Piper Cub or something. So I think a lot of it was pushing the limits. It was like, I'm never going to know for sure if I don't give it a shot. And if I fail, I fail. But as it turns out, I didn't. So it was, it was incredibly surreal.
That all or nothing approach is very, very familiar for a lot of us. And, so you end up graduating college, you join in 1970. When did you end up going and getting deployed to Vietnam?
Well, I was commissioned an officer in the Air Force the same day I graduated, went to flight school, then F4 school. So about a year and a half after I graduated, I was finally qualified. And in October, November of 71, made my way through survival schools and then finally to Southeast Asia, where I was assigned to a base in Thailand. And then within a couple of days was starting to fly combat missions. So it was interesting when you go from training and you're flying and then realize that the bad guys are shooting at you. It was, it's like, well, geez, it's like finally waking up like, oh, this is real stuff now. And so it took a little while for naive Ralph to sort through all this, but I stayed on my game. I wasn't like a lot of guys. I didn't drink a lot of coffee. I didn't go to the bar a lot. I figured I needed my wits about me every day just to break even with everybody else. So it was a really developmental experience. It really was.
I can only imagine so. And from what I understand, I had just read something recently that during that time there was a ceasefire going on or something like that. There weren't prisoners of wars being taken.
Well, yeah. So the first POW over in Hanoi was shot down in August of 68, and that continued till about the spring of 64. I'm sorry. And that continued till the spring of 68 when Johnson declared a ceasefire of bombing over North Vietnam. So the war still waged in the South. We just weren't flying combat missions in the North. And when I was shot down in February 72, that was one of the first combat missions in 4 years to fly over North Vietnam. So there had not been a lot of aviator types that were taking POW for that 4-year period in Hanoi. So it was very different. Yeah.
Would you mind walking us through a little bit of that experience?
It was one of those things where if you could plan it any worse, you couldn't. So we were flying over the North for the first time in years. It was during Tet, which is their big holiday season. We were flying for a couple of hours. We were flying as forward air controllers, so we really didn't have a lot of bombs. Our job was to find targets and mark them and lead the other guys in, which we were doing. We kept getting refueled and coming back, and it was a quiet day. And then all of a sudden, all of our electronics light up. So all the SAM missile sites, all the surface-to-air missile sites finally decided to get active after an hour and a half. And now it was just a matter of finding more targets and not being shot down. And we could start to see them launch, and we were rolling in to kind of knock out that surface-to-air missile site, and boom, we hear this big thud from the back of the aircraft, and then all of our instruments that were nicely where they should have been in the green, all of a sudden went to zero. And all the fire warning lights come on, and just really bad news. And we were flying low and fast, what you have to do as forward air controllers. So we didn't have time to get out altitude. We didn't have any engines. We couldn't make it to the water. We were too far. Couldn't make it to friendly territory. We were too far and too low. So the choice we had was ride that puppy to the ground or reject. And we opted to reject. We had a nice safe ejection. The challenge was now we're over North Vietnam and we're in farmlands as opposed to a lot of South Vietnam, which is jungle. So we didn't have a place to hide. And we're floating down during the holiday into the area we've been bombing, landing in a village that are shooting at us as we're floating down in our parachute. It was Murphy's Law times 10. And we didn't get hit But my objective there was just do a successful parachute landing fall. Don't kill myself on landing. Made that, but there were 100 or so villagers waiting for us, and we probably would have been killed. We would have been beaten to death had it not been for what we think is a reservist or some kind of guy that had some common sense, that had orders that said, if you see these aliens floating down from space, if you could capture them and bring them to Hanoi, you'll get a promotion. So we probably had some guy that was in the military and basically drug us to safety, didn't allow them to kill us. And 24 hours later, we're in Hanoi. And that's when the festivities began.
That's absolutely incredible. It sounds like you had to take each problem or event just in order as it was coming.
Yeah. Your planning horizon was hours. Well, the best planning horizon was a day, especially in captivity, which is living long enough to fight another day. It's not too different than guys fighting in combat. You really couldn't plan that much far ahead, especially for me. I was in solitary confinement for a while, and all you have is you. And, you learn that you have to rely on you because there was nobody else to rely on. So you learn a lot about adapting to that change and learning about your training and learning about yourself and relying on yourself or your faith or your God, whatever you have, and just survive through an interrogation or just survive till tomorrow and then fight another day and figure out what to do tomorrow. So it was really interesting for a young 23-year-old guy that, came out of Philadelphia and just, didn't know anything. I was barely an adult. I was an adult by age, but that was about it.
Yeah, so it sounds like your training for SEER definitely assisted in kind of preparing you. But I mean, to be able to have training and then develop the mindset as well when you're actually in the scenario, what brought you through that time in captivity?
Well, the training, as you mentioned, was significant, giving you at least enough confidence that you had some background and some savvy. Of course, now you had to execute the plan, which is difficult. But a lot of it was finding a lot about yourself in difficult circumstances, and some things you were able to do when you have your wits about you. But when you're sleep deprived and food deprived and injured without medical treatment and being punished or beaten up on a daily basis and having to go back and do it again, you better figure out a new plan on day 2 because you can't keep repeating yourself. So when I talked about being developmental, you really had to learn a lot about yourself, what worked and what didn't, what made you a better person, what made you a better resistor, what gave you the opportunity to resist to the best of your ability and still maintain your honor and dignity and adhering to the code of conduct. So there were a lot of balls that were being juggled, not the least of which was just trying to survive another day. So it was an interesting balancing act. And, I was in solitary for 2.5 months, which sounds like a lot, but it wasn't compared to a lot of the other guys. But it was, not having another American around, not hearing another American voice for a while, knowing that you only had you to rely on. It was really an interesting period where you learn a lot about your strengths and a lot about your weaknesses. And if you can self-correct, that's good.
And so after 2.5 months of solitude, you were brought in with other prisoners of war?
Yeah, I ended up being reunited with my pilot, my front seater. And we ended up in a really dingy area of the Hanoi Hilton. It was a terrible environment. It was 6 feet by 8 feet with a couple of cement slabs for beds and leg iron. But we had company. And as it turned out, there were 6 other cells in that area that had other Americans in it. So covertly, we would communicate with them and try to pass on whatever learnings you had, or just talking to somebody. And that was rejuvenating when you find out that there's another American there that has your back, or can give you some words of encouragement based on their experience. Because a lot of them, everybody outranked me, so. That was really important. The fact that you were not alone. And the fact that somebody else's experience or their willingness to take a risk or their willingness to do anything in your behalf to help you along the way was really significant. And then after a couple of weeks of that, we ended up, as it turned out, more and more guys were being shot down because the war in the North now had accelerated. More people were being shot down, so they moved us into a bigger room. And as it ended up, that turned out from 6 or 8 people to about 30 over several months. So I had the opportunity to get learnings, mentoring from officers in the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines that all outranked me, but had tons of experience to help me along my path to becoming a better human, a better adult, a better officer, a better parent. So when I said developmental, it was that period there was really important.
And this was all happening in hostile captivity where, they're trying to deprive you of all this. You're learning life lessons.
Yeah. It was fascinating. And then in December of 72, they had the big B-52 bombings. So now we're on the ground on the receiving end of dozens and dozens of B-52s bombing the Hanoi area. And the walls were shaking, the ceilings were caving in. I mean, that stuff was really close. But we knew there was no way we're getting the hell out of there unless we bombed them into submission. So every day, basically, we just prayed that we weren't the victims of a bomb because B-52s fly high and they drop 100 at a time. And it doesn't take much for the wind to shift a little bit, and you're in bad shape. So, but it was that. And as we talked about it earlier, a good day is waking up and there's no dirt on top of your face and there's no small arms fire going on. I mean, it's a very different world of balance and perspective that we learned.
Sounds like one of the things I learned a long time ago. If you have breath in your lungs, you still have a chance.
Stop complaining about the small stuff. That's exactly right.
So when did your time in captivity end? How was that experience getting out of captivity?
Yeah. Well, I was shot down in February 72 and I got released March of 73. So it was about 14 months. And of course, we didn't know what was going on. And I was a short timer. I mean, you got to realize the longest held POW in the North in Hanoi was Everett Alvarez. He was there 8.5 years. So my 14 months was like a Lamaze breath compared to him. It was nothing. But in January of 73, after the B-52 bombings, things got a little bit better. And we thought, well, we didn't hear any noise. We didn't hear any bombing. The treatment got a little bit better. The food got a little better. We were let outside a little more often. And we thought, well, maybe things were improving. But we were suspect because everything was propaganda. So, but it wasn't until the very end when they gave you civilian clothes and took you on a bus to the airport that we realized that it might be true. And we saw a C-141, a big transport land, wasn't shot at, had a big red cross on the tail. And we thought, this has the beginnings of being pretty decent. But we got repatriated. We saluted. We got our name announced. We walked across the tarmac. We got in the plane. We took off. It was 20 minutes later when we finally got what's called feet wet, when we got out over the ocean, that the pictures you see of people yelling and screaming, it took 20 minutes because we realized we still had the chance of being shot down. We were still suspect. So when it finally happened, it was invigorating.
Just like holding your breath until you know that you're clear.
Let me tell you, freedom, there's this old quote, freedom has a taste, and it really does. When you lose 100% of it, literally everything you've ever known is taken from you, and you're begging for everything. To get that freedom back again is really remarkable, and you really appreciate it tenfold when you've lost it and you've regained it. So a lot of folks, your service as well, you're fighting for these freedoms. You might not be fighting in combat every day or even on American soil, but you're fighting bad guys every day, because if you let them have their way with you or their will, a lot of these freedoms would disappear. The military serves an important mission, and it's the preservation of that freedom that is very precious.
Absolutely. Now, what was it like to come home after 14 months of captivity? I mean, your family, you're a changed man.
Yeah, for me, it was only a year and a half. Some guys was 5 to 8 years. Uh, it was remarkable. I mean, for many, many years, in the 60s into the 70s, Vietnam veterans were painted with a really bad brush. I mean, we were toxic. You couldn't wear your uniforms in public. You barely could put it on a resume. Uh, a lot of the veterans organizations wouldn't even allow you to become a member. I mean, it was just nasty. But with the POWs, with 591 of us, it was a small number coming out of Hanoi, we were welcomed home. And I think Americans and government, everybody else, they just wanted to have some closure, and we were it. But it was really uncomfortable. It was nice to get home, but knowing that 3 million served and were treated poorly, and 591 of us were treated specially, was uncomfortable. But it was really nice. I mean, I got this thing I keep on my desk. I have a POW bracelet from people wore back in the early 70s. Believe it or not, 50 years later, I still hear from people that wore mine in the 70s. I still hear from them. The POW flag still flies. So there's a lot that came out of that I think made the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War and everything else, respect for the military person, more appreciated. Even if you hated the combat or the military or the government, at least we took good care of the soldiers. So that was something good came out of that.
Absolutely. And from what I understand, you served for another 4 years after your release too?
I did. I served another almost 5. I served 8 years active duty, and it was time to get out. You know, a lot of relocations and disruptions and families and kids, and it was time to find out if I was really worth anything, because the military environment for me was kind of protected. You know, and having a POW in your background, you know, you kind of got. They didn't claim you did, but I think we got a little bit of special handling. So I figured, unless I got out and found out if I could really make it as Ralph Galati citizen, not Ralph Galati Vietnam veteran or POW. So that was a big motivation. And I really tried hard for a year and a half to get with IBM. I finally got there. Once again, big risk. I had no technology background. I had no business background. I had nothing. But they had a great education program, and I decided that was where I wanted to go. So that turned out well. At the same time, I did some adjunct teaching at night because I always wanted to teach, but I didn't think I would be able to. So I did that. In the last dozen or so years, it's been really focused on veterans and trying to help in our community with veterans-related services and issues.
Absolutely. Now, from what I understand, and this is why I'm so grateful to your generation, because so many changes came about for our generation because of the work that you all did over decades of being at least seeing your fellow veterans being mistreated. A lot of you picked up the flag and said, we're going to fight for these guys. We're going to make sure, because PTSD didn't exist. Injuries weren't able to be treated very well. Yeah. And also to have the mistreatment from everyday citizens that did not know what it was like to wear a uniform. Right. Yeah. You guys put in all that work. What resources did you turn to? Like, how did you avoid becoming one of these statistics and really focus on serving your community?
Yeah, I really thought about this a lot, and I think it's a combination of things. I mean, I had a good family structure. I was blessed with that. I had a good education. I had good friends. I had good military training. There was a lot of good stuff plus I had a pretty strong faith. Catholic schools, even through college. I had good survival training in the military. I mean, I don't know what it was, but I think it was a composite. And maybe if any one of those things wasn't there, it might have made me a lesser person. Plus, like I said, you found that military service, public service, or commitment to service in general was strong. So in the military was that bond of brotherhood. In the Hanoi prison camps, if somebody was injured or they had a really bad situation, 100% of your attention went to make sure that guy survived. So I think a lot of those things together, which was focusing on a common mission, having a goal, having something, and leveraging all of your background and strengths, and then also realizing, what did I really suck at? Was I able to self-improve? When I found all these weaknesses, was I able to do something about it at an early age and then leverage that learning to make myself a better person? So I think it was that composite. But like I said, we didn't have the PTSD training. We didn't have any of that. It wasn't until a therapist 30 years later, a doctor was giving me a physical and said, I'm looking at your records and I see you don't have PTSD listed down. And of course, my answer was, I'm okay. And he says, well, you know what? You don't look okay to me. And he sent me to a shrink, and there's a big difference between a veteran coming to me or you in this example and saying, I'm just back from combat, I'm okay. To which I said, you could be okay, but you're not the same. You can't be the same coming out of combat. So the challenge now is finding these veterans and making sure that they are helped. And sometimes it really is more of finding the families to get the families to help the veterans to get some help. So it's a good mission to be on. With what the challenges you have, you may help somebody, but you'll never know it. But if you help one guy or gal that you might never know, mission accomplished. It's very tough duty, but at the same time, a lot of cases, veterans don't know how to take care of themselves, which is our challenge. You got to find them and you got to force them to get benefits or get health care or get mental health care. So my mission lately has been also to work with the spouses and the dependents, families, friends, neighbors, church groups that thank them for their service and then ask them if they're getting their benefits or if they look troubled, if they look a little off. Make sure you challenge them, get them some help. There's plenty of places to go. I'm putting that burden out there mostly on the community that we have around our veterans.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the big reasons that we started this is there are so many resources available. Most of them are free. Yes. Unfortunately, so many people, one, won't ask for help, or two, don't know where to look when seeking help. But I mean, all of these organizations, they're either nationwide or right there in the community. And one of the big ones that I turn people to, especially for suicide prevention, if you're not satisfied with the VA care, there's an American Foundation for Suicide Prevention right in your town that can always turn you to resources. If you're not ready to talk about that, then go to a local faith group. Start talking to people there because they want to help. It's service to our community. We don't just go to church to be better people. We go because there's a mission, there's a purpose there, and we do want to help people.
Yeah. It's not too different than AA, the 12 steps. Sometimes it's hard work. PTSD, suicidal people, you got to do it every day. And sometimes just talking to somebody, hopefully a practitioner of some kind, but just talking to somebody is good therapy. And I'm still spending time today helping Vietnam veterans 50 years later. We are the worst customers, veterans, the worst. We don't ask for anything. So the younger folks, hopefully we could get to them as well. If we could find them, we could help them.
That's so good. Now, I know that this wasn't just something that you came up with. You've been at the same job, or you worked the same job for 28 years following your military service. And a lot of people my age won't understand what it means to have a job, whether it's availability, focus, or desire. We don't know all the reasons that I think our average job rate right now is like 7 jobs in our lifetime. Whereas, my father's generation, your generation, it's the job that you worked. You had one for 30 years. And so for yourself, how did you end up developing this heart of service and such a huge impact in the community over those 30 years? Because you don't just build it in a single day.
Well, I was really lucky because IBM was very much respect for the individual and customer service, which was right in my wheelhouse. And they really preached that and believed it. And And that made my life a lot easier because going from the Air Force to IBM was not a difficult transition. I just changed the uniform. It was 400,000 people in one and 400,000 people in the other. They were both huge organizations, but very respectful of training and of the individual and high ethical standards. I mean, that made life very easy. And teaching was the same thing when I did some adjunct teaching. And I was really, as I got older, you realize, especially when you're in a job where you're now mentoring other people or people listen to you because of your expertise, you never know what nugget you might drop on somebody, what sentence, anything in a speech that they might take, and then it might be life-changing for them. So you have to take sometimes what you do very, very seriously. But you have to give people an opportunity to lead. You have to give them an opportunity to take some risks. You have to give them an opportunity to fail and learn from it. And IBM afforded all of that. And I was lucky back in the 60s and 70s, your mindset was career. It wasn't jobs. It was a career. And I'm sure it's very different today. So I know it's fairly challenging for people, because like you said, your horizon might be 5 to 7 years and you're off and running to something else. And it's hard to continue to reestablish yourself and learn. So today's challenges are difficult. It really is. And as much as this technology is great, I could never work in this environment. I had to be eyeball to eyeball. I had to be touching them and seeing them in their face directly. So it's a very different world today, and I think more challenging because it's very non-personal. The interpersonal piece isn't as prominent.
That's needing that personal touch at the workplace. And I hope that one day a lot of us do get back to that mindset of having a career. This is what I do, and building that community right there, and finally being settled in it. Now, I do have some final questions, kind of rapid fire for you, based off of our 5 pillars that we talk about on this show: physical health, mental health, spiritual, relational, and professional. If you don't mind, I want to get your take on these. So first question is, what do you do to care for your body and physical well-being?
I had some physical issues coming out of Vietnam. So even today, I am 75. Today, I have a personal trainer. Cost me a lot of money, but I have to take care of my body. And he knows me well enough because he was also a staff guy with my chiropractor. So he knows what I can handle and what I can't handle. He knows what parts of my body to build up so that my back does not get inflamed. He also, he's working on my body to be sure that I am dexterous, that I have flexibility and balance, and a little bit of tone, keeping my weight down. So if I don't have that 2 or 3 times a week, I know that I will fail miserably. So I force myself to take care of myself in that regard.
It's really awesome. You have an accountability person to help guide you through it. You respect your own personal limitations.
I hate exercise. I would never do it on my own. I detest it. Am I clear? I hate it.
Absolutely.
But a couple times a week with him, whatever he says, I do. So.
That's really great. No, that accountability right there, and also just the added incentive that it's something that you're paying for out of pocket.
Well, and it's structured too. I mean, it's scheduled. It is structured. You're right. I'm paying for it, and I have physically seen, and mentally seen the results. So it's a great closed loop cycle for me.
What do you do on a regular basis to maintain positive mental health?
It's hard being retired. I go to church every week. That helps me. I try to keep active with some kind of a project every day. So I'm on a couple of boards, a local veteran memorial in Delaware County. I'm on the Red Cross board. I do some stuff with St. Joe's once in a while, with my high school alumni group, some veterans groups. I still do public speaking. But my universe is veterans now. That's pretty much where that's my sweet spot. They're the group that I'm most comfortable talking to or talking about. And I take it seriously because I think that, especially with younger folks, that if I say something that could help them formulate a plan or learn something about themselves or give them some motivation or incentive, then mission accomplished. And that, like this right now, this is really for you, but it's really big mental health for me. It is very therapeutic for me to talk about this stuff.
It's really awesome. Yeah, help in helping others, we continue to help ourselves.
Yeah.
How do you maintain healthy relationships in your life?
That's really hard. Your inner circle of people, the smaller circle that I have now, is really important to me. I still have really close family. We're older now, so that's very different. So we have a second and a third generation. So like I have a granddaughter. Church group is important. Your veterans community. A lot of that is just, instead of having tons and tons of friends, it's having really a small circle of really good relationships that I know that if I have a need, I know that I could call somebody. There's also people that call me regularly just to see how I'm doing. And I find that really rewarding, that somebody cares enough, even if I'm not sick. They just want to check in and say, are you okay? How you doing? Can I do anything for you? It's a great feeling.
What advice would you give to somebody that's searching for their purpose?
There's the very trite thing, which is find out what you're good at and find out what you're passionate about. And if those two things intersect, then you're kind of on a good path. So mine was veteran stuff and veterans relationships, but then my background of military, business, and teaching really helps me reach a lot of people because I have three backgrounds that usually coalesce around somebody's background and skills. So a lot of it is that I am a big fan of, for younger people, of military service. I am a bigger fan of compulsory public service. And if it's military, if it's the Red Cross or the Peace Corps, I don't care what it is, but I would love to see our younger people invest in themselves and their country and do a little bit of public service. It would be very developmental, and they would become a lot less selfish. They would become selfless. So I would like to see more of that.
That's awesome. And what's one tool or tip that you would give to somebody in their career that's helped you?
I have several. Sorry, I can't narrow it down to one.
Please do share. I'm all ears.
Take prudent risks. It's okay to fail. Just learn from it. Embrace change, because that teaches you how to be adaptive, because the world does not stand still as much as you might want to. Take every opportunity you can to lead. Take charge of some things. And my biggest one is, when in doubt, a situation arises, take some kind of action. Don't do nothing. If you take action, odds are is that you will be successful. If you're not, you'll learn from your mistake. A mentor will help you. If you do nothing, you can't be helped. Okay, there's nothing to fix. So there's a few things, but it takes action on your part. You have to be a little bit overt and get yourself, find out what you're truly made of. That's the big deal.
Those are some truly good words of wisdoms. Now, I know that you've been a part of the St. Joseph's community for a long time. You launched the Entrepreneurial Boot Camp for veterans there, which I had the privilege of attending back in March. If anybody wants to reach out to you online or through the web, how can they go about finding more of your inspirational story and wisdom? Because you just have a wealth of knowledge to be able to pass on to people.
If you just look me up, I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn. Ralph Galati. You can just look me up. There aren't that many of me. I'll usually get messages from folks that will find that, and they'll send me a Facebook message, and then we'll connect. And sometimes it's around benefits. It could be about schooling. It could be about anything. I am a mile wide and an inch deep by design. So I have a lot of breadth, but I don't have a lot of depth. Some things I'm better at, but I have a great network. And even if I can't answer the question, I know the exact resource to go to. So if it's mental health, if it's the VA, if it's education, if it's benefits, whatever it happens to be, I am 1 point away from a really good contact. So I would encourage people to reach out.
That's what I've heard. You know just about everybody that a veteran needs to know.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And finally, before I let you go, What's something you would say to somebody that is currently struggling?
There are tons and tons of government, VA, and community resources that could help you. If you don't want the VA because you hate them, that's fine. There are plenty of other places that can go, especially in the area of mental health. If you're struggling at all, if you are aimless, or if you're in pain physically or mentally, if you just don't feel right, if you're tired of being alone, if you're directionless, if you're faithless, ask for help. Call me. Just track me down, and I'll go. Otherwise, you just got to find a friend. I talked earlier about communications, the value of that. The value of having a mentor or a sponsor or an advocate, whatever term you want to use, is really critical. For those that are having some mental health related issues, whether it's PTSD related or if you have some suicidal types of issues, communicating with somebody is the life breath of survival. So taking some action, but also, like I talked about earlier, the burden on the families. These guys coming back from combat, you could see some behavioral changes. Don't just skirt them away that, Joe or Mary will get better. They might not. So if you see something that seems a little off, it's probably a little off. Take some action. Don't ask them to do it. Just take action. So I think that's the big thing is just find a resource, somebody you're comfortable to talk to. It could be a priest. It could be a rabbi. It could be a close buddy. It could be a neighbor, a friend, somebody at the VA. It could be a stranger. Maybe you feel more comfortable talking to a stranger. There are tons and tons of veterans groups. Find one you're comfortable with. Ask somebody to get you help. So there are no excuses.
Excellent advice, Ralph. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Sure. It was a great honor to be here, and thanks for including me in your program.